The night before the moon landing, it was the night before history changed forever. The night before humanity stepped on the moon, July 19th, 1969. The world was holding its breath. Inside NASA's mission control in Houston, a restless silence filled the air. The hum of computers mixed with the buzz of fluorescent lights, while exhausted engineers leaned over their consoles, eyes red from days without proper sleep. Coffee cups, ashtrays, and empty soda cans covered every desk. Everyone was tired, but no one dared to close their eyes. For 4 long days, Apollo 11 had traveled nearly 240,000 miles through the cold void of space. The spacecraft now circled the moon, waiting for the moment to begin its descent. Around the world, millions of people were awake too. They watched their televisions, stared at newspapers, listened to radios, whispering the same question again and again. Can they really do it? Can they really land on the moon? In mission control, Flight Director Gene Kranz stood firm in his white vest, his expression carved from steel. He was the man responsible for every decision, every heartbeat of the mission. He looked at the screens, at streams of data glowing in front of him, and said quietly to himself, "We've come too far. We can't lose it now." Far away, hundreds of thousands of miles above the lunar surface, the 3 astronauts floated in silence. Michael Collins stayed alone in the command module Columbia, orbiting the moon. His task was to remain in orbit while his crewmates, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, would attempt the landing in the lunar module, Eagle. Collins had been awake for nearly 18 hours, checking systems, adjusting orbits, speaking softly into his recorder. His voice was calm, but behind that calm was a man carrying the weight of loneliness. "The guys are resting," he murmured. "I'm not sure I can. Too quiet up here. The moon looks close enough to touch." Inside the lunar module, Armstrong and Aldrin tried to rest, but their minds refused to stop spinning. The small cabin felt like a tin can, tight, metallic, humming with the faint pulse of life support systems. They were strapped in their sleeping bags, floating side by side, surrounded by switches and flickering lights. Armstrong stared out the tiny window. Beneath them lay the gray, cratered surface of the moon, cold and silent. Aldrin glanced at him. "Hard to believe, huh?" Aldrin whispered. Armstrong smiled faintly. "Yeah, we've trained for years, but this is real now." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Armstrong added softly, "Buzz, tomorrow morning, the whole world's going to be watching." Aldrin nodded. "Then let's give them something worth watching." Their words faded into the hum of machinery. Even in that small capsule, the silence of space pressed against them. There was no day or night, just endless darkness and light from a distant sun. Both men closed their eyes, but sleep didn't come. The mind of a man about to make history cannot rest. Back on Earth, the sleeplessness wasn't limited to NASA. In New York, crowds gathered in front of electronics store windows, watching grainy images on black and white televisions. In London, families sat wrapped in blankets, drinking coffee at 3 a.m. In small villages and big cities across the planet, people stayed awake, waiting for a moment that belonged to all of humanity. Inside mission control, time moved differently. Minutes stretched into hours. Engineers murmured to one another in low voices. The tension was invisible but heavy enough to feel. Gene Kranz checked his watch, then looked up at the main screen showing telemetry from Eagle. Every number, every flicker of light represented a life, a chance, a dream. He whispered, "Hold together, boys. Hold together." At 3 in the morning, Armstrong floated to the control panel inside the lunar module, running through one last check. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, but there was something human in the quiet focus of his face. Aldrin read the checklist beside him, his voice steady though his hands trembled slightly. "Propellant levels nominal. Landing radar set. Oxygen flow normal." Armstrong replied, "Guidance computer initialized. Looks good." On the other side of the void in Houston, Charlie Duke's calm southern voice broke the silence of mission control. "Eagle, Houston. You're looking good for powered descent tomorrow." Armstrong's voice came back steady, professional. "Roger, Houston. Eagle is go." There was a brief pause, and then Armstrong added with a tired half-smile, "We'll try to get some rest, if we can." Laughter rippled softly through mission control. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Tension breaking just for a second. Everyone knew the truth. None of them would sleep either. In Washington, D.C., the President of the United States was awake too. Richard Nixon walked slowly across the floor of the Oval Office, unable to relax. On his desk lay two speeches. One was for success, the speech he prayed he would read. The other was for disaster, one that he hoped the world would never hear. It began with haunting words. Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. He looked at the papers, then turned away. Tonight, even the most powerful man on Earth could do nothing but wait. In Houston, the hours crawled. Engineers checked and rechecked their work. A young guidance officer named Steve Bales had been awake for 36 hours. He kept staring at his screen, scanning data, terrified he might miss something. When asked years later what he remembered most, he said, "The silence. The kind of silence that presses on your chest. You're afraid to breathe because every breath feels too loud." That night, the world of machines became a world of human hearts. These were men in their 20s and 30s, some barely out of college, holding the fate of the mission in their hands. They weren't thinking of fame. They were thinking of doing it right. Above them, the sign on Gene Kranz's desk read, "Failure is not an option." It wasn't a slogan, it was survival. Nobody left. Nobody even thought about sleep. The fluorescent lights had become their sun, and the hum of computers their heartbeat. Some closed their eyes for a moment, only to snap awake seconds later. It was a different kind of war, a war against exhaustion, against time, against fear. Meanwhile, out there in space, Apollo 11 drifted into the moon's shadow. Sunlight began to spread across the horizon, cold and white. Inside the lunar module, Armstrong floated near the window and watched the first rays of light touch the gray surface below. "The surface," he whispered, "it's like powdered charcoal. No color, just gray infinity," Aldrin wrote quietly in his notebook, his handwriting floating in zero gravity. "Everything here feels both ancient and new," he noted, as if creation just finished yesterday. They were not poets by profession, but in that silence, every man became one. Words took on weight, time lost meaning. On Earth, dawn began to break in Houston. People arrived early at work, radio stations buzzing with updates from NASA. Across America, school children begged their parents to let them stay home to watch history. Television cameras waited. The world's eyes were fixed on a patch of lunar dust hundreds of thousands of miles away. In mission control, the lights dimmed slightly as the next shift came in, faces fresh but tense. They knew what was coming: the descent, the landing, the heartbeat of history. Kranz stood still, looking up at the giant screen. He knew sleep was impossible. His voice was low but firm as he spoke to his team. "Gentlemen, this is it. We've worked for years for this day. Stay sharp. No mistakes." No one answered out loud, but the room was filled with a silent vow. Every man there knew the price of failure. Every man there knew that in the next 24 hours their names would either be written in glory or buried in regret. Above the moon, Armstrong and Aldrin prepared themselves for morning. They secured their suits, checked the oxygen flow, reviewed the landing procedures once again. Their bodies were tired, but their minds were razor sharp. Armstrong closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "One step at a time." Aldrin stared at the control panel, then at his friend. "See you on the surface," he said quietly. Armstrong smiled. "See you on the surface." Outside, the sun rose over the lunar horizon, bathing the spacecraft in pale light. The moon's surface below looked both peaceful and dangerous, untouched and waiting. The men of Apollo 11 floated in that silence, somewhere between two worlds, Earth behind them, the moon ahead. On Earth, millions waited. In their hearts, they already felt it, the sense that tomorrow something would change forever. Humanity was about to leave its cradle. The sleepless mission of Apollo 11 moved forward through the quiet hours of dawn. History was near. The night that refused to sleep was ending, and with it came the promise of a new beginning, not just for America, but for everyone who had ever looked up at the moon and dreamed of touching it. The descent begins morning arrived not with sunlight but with tension. In mission control, the air was thick with anticipation. The giant screens glowed softly in the half-dark room, showing lines of numbers, heartbeat data, fuel readings, altitude, velocity, all flowing like the pulse of a living thing. Men sat at their consoles, eyes fixed, hands steady, voices low but urgent. They had rehearsed this moment for years, yet nothing could truly prepare them for what was about to happen. At precisely 8:32 a.m. Houston time, Flight Director Gene Kranz's calm voice echoed through the room. "Okay, gentlemen, let's go to work." Across space, the lunar module Eagle separated from the command module Columbia. A metallic click vibrated through the ship as the two crafts drifted apart. In that instant, the connection between Armstrong Aldrin and Collins was no longer physical, only through radio waves and faith. "Eagle, your go for descent orbit insertion," Mission Control announced. Armstrong's voice came through calm and clear. "Roger, we're go." Inside Eagle, the sound of mechanical hisses filled the cabin as valves opened. Propellant shifted and engines prepared for ignition. Armstrong's gloved hand hovered over the throttle. Aldrin double-checked the numbers. The tiny lunar world below seemed to turn slowly beneath them, covered in craters and shadows that had never felt the touch of life. "Here we go," Armstrong said softly. The descent engine fired. The module vibrated violently. Dust and tiny fragments floated inside as the two men began their fall toward the moon. In Houston, all chatter stopped. The data screens flickered with readings. Altitude dropping, velocity steady, guidance nominal. Kranz's voice. "Stay with it. Boys?" Armstrong and Aldrin called out readings in a rhythm that sounded almost like prayer. "Throttle set. Altitude 16,000 feet. Rate of descent 120 feet per second. Guidance looking good." In orbit above them, Michael Collins looked down through his window, watching the tiny glint of the lunar module moving away. "Good luck, guys," he whispered. "See you soon." His voice didn't reach them, but he said it anyway. Back on Earth, television commentators spoke in hushed tones. Across America, living rooms turned silent. Fathers sat with their sons. Mothers held their children, all watching that small white spacecraft falling toward the unknown. Then, a pause. "Houston, Eagle, we've got program alarm 1202. The calm voice broke the silence. In Mission Control, heads snapped toward the guidance officer. An alarm, nobody had expected that. For a second, confusion flashed through the room. What did it mean? Was it fatal? "Irumvam 2 alarm," a controller repeated. "What's happening?" Steve Bales, the young guidance officer, checked his data furiously. Sweat rolled down his temple. He had seconds to decide. His console blinked. The computer was overloaded, too many tasks at once, but it could still function. He grabbed his headset. "We're go on that alarm," he said firmly. "Go," Krantz nodded sharply. "Eagle, Houston, your go." "Repeat, your go." Armstrong's voice came back, tight but steady. "Roger, go." The world exhaled, the descent continued. The moon grew larger in the window. Gray plains, jagged craters, shadows like black scars. Armstrong's hand stayed firm on the controls. Aldrin read data. Altitude 5,000 feet. 2,000 to go. Fuel quantity decreasing. Krantz looked at the fuel numbers. Too fast, too low. He clenched his fist. "Come on, Neil," he whispered. Armstrong looked out the window. What he saw chilled him. The computer had guided them toward a crater field littered with boulders the size of cars. If they landed there, they'd tip over and never rise again. He made a decision. "Taking over manual control," Armstrong said. His voice was calm, but his heart was pounding. He gripped the hand controller and began flying Eagle by hand. The lunar dust below shimmered like silver snow. The computer fought him. He ignored it. Aldrin called out altitudes like a drummer, keeping tempo. 200 feet. 90 seconds of fuel. Forward velocity good. In Houston, nobody breathed. They were on the edge of disaster. Armstrong's voice again, quiet but clipped. "Picking up some dust." "Can't see the surface," Aldrin's tone sharpened. 30 feet. 2.5 down. Shadow out there. Kranz's lips moved silently. "Come on, Neil, you can do this." Drifting a little to the right, Armstrong muttered, "Contact light." Aldrin shouted suddenly, "Contact light!" Armstrong's hand shot to the engine switch. Engine stop. There was a pause. Just static. Then Armstrong's voice came through, calm and historic. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Mission Control exploded in sound. Cheers, tears, laughter, relief. A wave of emotion that no training could contain. Men hugged each other. Some fell to their knees. Gene Kranz simply took off his headset, wiped his eyes, and said quietly, "Good job, gentlemen. You just landed on the moon. On Earth, millions of hearts beat as one. The impossible had happened. Humanity had set foot on another world, or would in a few hours. In the lunar module, Armstrong and Aldrin sat in stunned silence. They looked at each other and smiled. The kind of smile only two men who've beaten death can share. Armstrong radioed again, his voice light but firm. "Houston, we're breathing again. Thanks for the good words." They began shutting down systems, conserving power. Their next task was rest, but who could rest now? Below them lay the sea of tranquility, endless gray dust untouched by time. Armstrong peered through the window, studying the surface. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Beautiful desolation." Aldrin floated beside him, taking pictures. "Look at that horizon," he said. "It's so close, but it feels infinite." For a moment they said nothing. Then Aldrin quietly recited a verse he remembered from Psalms. "When I consider the heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained." His voice trailed off. Armstrong didn't reply. He just kept looking. On Earth, reporters rushed to deliver the news. Headlines were already being printed. "The Eagle has landed." Bells rang in towns across America. Strangers embraced in streets. For one night, the world seemed united. In Mission Control, the team didn't celebrate for long. They knew the hardest part was yet to come, getting them home. But for now, Krantz allowed himself a rare smile. "Let's just breathe," he said. In orbit, Collins passed overhead, watching his radar screen blink. "Tranquility Base," he called. "I see you down there." "Nice going." Armstrong's laughter echoed through the radio. "Thanks, Mike. We'll leave the lights on for you." The bond between the three men, one above, two below, was invisible but unbreakable. They were bound by courage, by risk, by the thin thread of radio waves stretching across the void. As hours passed, Armstrong and Aldrin prepared for the next stage, the moonwalk. They reviewed procedures again and again. Outside their window, the sun hovered low, casting long shadows across the cratered plains. The light was harsh, unforgiving, and pure. They checked their suits, oxygen, and life support systems. Armstrong's mind wandered briefly to his family back home, to the small house in Houston where his wife Janet watched the broadcast with their children. He hoped she was proud and not too afraid. Aldrin floated quietly beside him. "Neil," he said softly, "ever think about how it'll feel? The first step?" Armstrong smiled faintly. "I try not to think about it too much. It's just one step, right?" Aldrin chuckled. "Sure, just one step for you." Neither man finished the sentence, but both knew how it would end. On Earth, the world didn't sleep. People stayed awake in living rooms and bars and school auditoriums waiting for that moment. Children clutched their parents' hands. Scientists in Moscow, priests in Rome, shepherds in rural Africa. All eyes were on that small, distant gray world. At Mission Control, Krantz adjusted his headset. "Eagle, Houston," he said. "You are go for EVA prep." Armstrong's calm voice replied, "Roger, go for EVA." The time had come. The first human step the world waited. On the gray plains of the moon inside the small metal cabin called Eagle, two men prepared to change human history. 6 hours had passed since landing, and though they had been told to rest, sleep never came. How could it? Beneath them lay an alien world, silent, untouched, waiting for their footprints. Neil Armstrong moved slowly, checking every detail of his spacesuit. Buzz Aldrin assisted him, each motion deliberate and careful. The cabin was small, barely big enough for both of them to move. They spoke little, conserving oxygen, letting their training guide their hands. Every switch they flipped, every valve they opened carried years of preparation. On Earth, Mission Control was alive with quiet intensity. Engineers whispered across headsets, their eyes on the glowing data. Gene Kranz stood at his post, hands behind his back, face unreadable but eyes burning with focus. "Let's make sure everything is perfect," he said softly. "We don't get a second chance." The world outside Mission Control had stopped spinning. Across America, televisions flickered in darkened rooms. Children sat cross-legged on floors, their parents standing behind them in awe. In London, Paris, Tokyo, Karachi, Cape Town, the same silence hung in the air. Humanity had never been so united in watching a single door open. At 9:56 p.m. Houston time, Armstrong spoke. "Okay, I'm going to depressurize the cabin now." A hiss filled the small space. The sound was sharp, mechanical, final. "Cabin pressure is 0, Aldrin confirmed. Armstrong turned toward the small, round hatch. The handle resisted slightly. Decades of engineering had brought it to this moment. Slowly, he pulled it open. Cold silver light flooded the cabin. Beyond it lay the surface of the moon. For the first time in human history, sunlight reflected off lunar dust and touched a human face. Armstrong's heart pounded not from fear, but from awe. He looked out, a horizon unlike any on Earth. No trees, no sky, no sound, just infinite gray stretching in all directions. The surface shimmered faintly under the harsh sunlight, fragile and eternal at once. He began his slow climb down the ladder, his bulky white suit glinting in the light. Aldrin watched him, silent, almost reverent. The radio crackled with Mission Control's steady voice. "Eagle, your go for EVA, proceed." Armstrong's breathing was audible through the speakers, calm but heavy. Each movement was slow, cautious, weightless. He paused on the last rung, his left boot hovering above the dust. The world held its breath. Then he spoke, his voice steady, but filled with something no words could capture. "That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind." The sentence echoed across the universe, from the barren surface of the moon to living rooms and radios and hearts around the world. For a second, time froze. The image of a single man standing on the moon burned into history forever. Buzz Aldrin followed shortly after, climbing down the ladder and joining Armstrong on the surface. "Beautiful view," Aldrin said. "Magnificent desolation." Armstrong looked at him through the gold reflection of his visor. Couldn't have said it better. They began to move slowly across the surface, learning to walk in the low gravity, bouncing softly with each step. Dust clung to their boots, floating and falling in graceful arcs. They planted the American flag, its fabric stiffened with wire so it would appear to wave. In Mission Control, the room erupted in applause, but then quieted again. The moment was too sacred for noise. Across the world, people wept, not from nationalism, but from wonder. Children pointed at their TV screens, realizing for the first time that the moon was not unreachable. An old woman in Kansas whispered, "They're up there. Real people on the moon." In Moscow, scientists gathered silently, acknowledging that even though it was America's flag, it was humanity's victory. Armstrong walked slowly away from the lunar module, testing the ground beneath him. Each step left a perfect footprint in the soft, powdery dust, footprints that would remain untouched for centuries. "Buzz," he said softly, "this dust, it's so fine. It sticks to everything." Aldrin crouched to collect samples, his gloves shimmering under the sunlight. "Each rock here has waited billions of years for this moment," he murmured. Above them, the earth hung in the black sky, a glowing blue marble surrounded by endless darkness. Aldrin looked up at it, his voice full of emotion. "Neil, look at that. That's home." Armstrong followed his gaze. "Every person we've ever known. Everyone we've ever loved. All right there." There was silence again, and the kind only space can hold. They planted a small metal plaque beside the flag. It read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." In Mission Control, Krantz watched the words being read over the radio, his throat tightening. For years they had lived under pressure, under deadlines, under the weight of the unknown. Now, for the first time, he allowed himself to breathe freely. Television cameras transmitted grainy black and white images of the astronauts moving in slow motion, their reflections mirrored in their gold visors. To the world it looked almost unreal, like a dream filmed in silence. But it was real. Armstrong placed a small package on the ground, a memorial for the fallen astronauts of Apollo 1, who had died in a fire during a ground test. "We carry their spirit with us," he said softly. Aldrin bowed his head. Meanwhile, Michael Collins orbited above, invisible from the surface but listening closely to every word. Alone in the command module, he was both part of history and apart from it. "I'm in the shadow of the moon right now," he said quietly into his recorder, "and I can't help but feel like the loneliest man in the universe, but also the luckiest." The astronauts continued their tasks, collecting rock samples, testing motion, setting up instruments. But even as they worked, their minds drifted. Armstrong paused to look at the horizon again. "You know," he said, "I thought it would feel different. But it feels peaceful." Aldrin smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what peace looks like. No borders, no sound, no time. On Earth, President Nixon spoke to them via radio, his voice transmitted across 240,000 miles. Neil and Buzz, for every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world. I'm sure they join with us in recognizing what you've done for mankind, Armstrong replied. Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor to represent all the people of the Earth. For a moment, Earth and Moon were connected, a single thread of sound linking two worlds. As they finished their work, Armstrong took one final look at the flag. It stood proudly in the lunar dust, unmoving, its shadow long and thin across the ground. Let's head home, he said quietly. Aldrin nodded. Home. They climbed back toward the ladder, turning once more to look behind them. It's strange, Aldrin said softly. We're the first, and yet someday people will come here and walk freely. Maybe even build cities, Armstrong smiled. Maybe they'll see our footprints and remember that it all started with a sleepless night. Back inside the lunar module, they removed their helmets and gloves, their faces flushed from exertion. They floated for a moment, exhausted but smiling. We did it, Aldrin whispered. Armstrong nodded. Yeah, we did. Outside, the moon remained silent, its surface now marked by the presence of humankind, fragile, temporary, but eternal in meaning. The Earth continued to shine above, distant yet close, like a memory glowing in the dark. In mission control, applause filled the room once more. Tears glistened in tired eyes. A young engineer whispered, We just became a spacefaring species. Krantz nodded slowly. And now, he said, we bring them home. The journey home begins. The moon was silent again. The footprints of two men marked its surface, and the flag stood frozen in stillness. But the explorers who had placed it there were preparing to leave. Inside the small lunar module, Armstrong and Aldrin moved slowly through their checklist, their movements precise and practiced. They had just lived through the most extraordinary hours of their lives, yet their voices sounded calm, almost ordinary, as if returning from a long hike rather than another world. Checklist complete, Aldrin said, his voice quiet in the helmet microphone. Armstrong floated a pencil toward him and smiled. Let's light this candle one more time. Outside their window, the surface of the moon glowed under a sharp, unfiltered sun. Long shadows stretched across the gray plains, eternal and unmoving. Their footprints lay undisturbed, soon to be left behind forever. In that silence, even the hum of machinery sounded sacred. In Houston, mission control was alive again with tension. The landing had been a triumph, but bringing them home was just as perilous. Flight Director Gene Kranz stood with his team, the same white vest, the same steel in his voice. We got them down, he said softly. Now let's get them back. Every man in that room understood that a single spark, a single valve failure could mean disaster. High above, Michael Collins orbited in the command module, watching his instruments and waiting. He had circled the moon 27 times, utterly alone, the most isolated human in history. Yet he felt no loneliness now, only anticipation. Come on, guys, he whispered. I'm ready when you are. At 1:54 p.m. Houston time, Armstrong's calm voice echoed through the radio. Houston, the Eagle is ready for ascent. Kranz nodded. Eagle, your go for liftoff, Godspeed. Aldrin's gloved hand reached for the ignition switch. Here we go, he said and pressed it. The ascent engine fired and the lunar module shook violently. Dust exploded outward in a golden cloud, and a small column of flame lifted the tiny craft away from the moon. The flag rippled briefly in the exhaust, and then fell still again. For a moment, Armstrong glimpsed their landing site shrinking beneath them, two sets of footprints leading nowhere, fading into infinity. Eagle is away, he reported. We're climbing. In mission control, the entire room leaned forward. Radar confirmed the signal. The Eagle was rising from the lunar surface. Voices murmured readings, velocity, pitch, altitude, each number another heartbeat of survival. Looking good, Krantz said. You're right on the trajectory, Armstrong exhaled slowly. Feels good to be heading home. As the engine burned, Aldrin looked through the small window. The horizon curved below them, gray fading into black. We left our mark down there, he said softly. Armstrong nodded. Yeah, now let's make sure we don't stay there. Within minutes, the lunar module reached orbit, a fragile machine surrounded by silence. Collins adjusted his path, searching for the blinking radar beacon that marked their approach. When he finally caught sight of them, a glimmer of metal against the void, a wave of relief flooded through him. "Eagle Columbia," he called. "I've got you in sight. Looking good, gentlemen." Armstrong's laughter came through, light and human. "Mike, you don't know how good it is to hear your voice." The docking was delicate, a ballet performed in microgravity. Every movement had to be perfect. Collins guided the command module forward slowly, aligning the ports. A click echoed through the hull, a sound that meant survival. "Hard dock," Collins confirmed. "Welcome back." Cheers erupted in mission control. Krantz allowed himself a rare smile. "They're together again," he said quietly. "Let's bring them all the way home." Inside the spacecraft, the three men reunited in the cramped cabin. For a moment, no one spoke. They just looked at one another, tired, hollow-eyed, grinning. Aldrin finally broke the silence. "Next stop, Earth," Armstrong chuckled. "That's the best destination I've heard in a long time." Collins floated a small package toward them, a pouch of orange juice. "A toast," he said, raising it in the air. "To the moon and to getting the hell back." They laughed, real laughter, light and warm. Outside, the moon slowly drifted away, shrinking behind them as the command module fired its main engine for trans-Earth injection. The burn lasted 2 minutes, shaking the cabin. Then, just like that, they were on a new path, falling homeward. In Houston, the data confirmed it. "Apollo 11 is on course for Earth return," the Capcom announced. Applause rippled softly through the room. No one wanted to celebrate too early, but for the first time in days, they allowed themselves to breathe. As hours passed, the moon faded from view. The astronauts watched it grow smaller, its light dimming behind them. Armstrong stared out the window, quiet. "Strange," he said. "It already feels far away, like a dream we woke up from." Aldrin nodded. "But the world won't ever sleep the same again." The spacecraft turned slowly, bringing the Earth into view. It was breathtaking. A glowing blue sphere streaked with white clouds floating in endless darkness. Collins whispered, "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." They spent long hours in radio conversations with Houston, running checks, logging data. But between the transmissions came quiet moments, small human pauses where they simply looked, thought, remembered. Armstrong wrote a few notes in his log, his handwriting neat and controlled. "We are returning to the only home we've ever known." The journey has changed nothing and everything. On Earth, news outlets around the globe celebrated. Newspapers printed front-page headlines before the crew had even landed. Children drew rockets on their school walls. Musicians wrote songs about the moon. For the first time in history, humanity felt small and infinite at the same time. As Apollo 11 sailed through the dark, the three men spoke softly about what came next. Collins said, "You think anyone will ever go back?" Armstrong smiled. "Someone will. Someday a kid watching us tonight will do it." Aldrin chuckled. "Maybe they'll build a motel up there. Sea of Tranquility Inn. 2 stars, no atmosphere." They laughed again, and for a few moments the universe didn't seem so cold. Back in Houston, the team kept watch through the long night. Krantz refused to leave. He leaned on the console, staring at the screen that showed Apollo 11's tiny blip inching toward Earth. "Keep her steady," he murmured. "We're not done till they're home." The journey home was quiet but demanding. Every system was monitored, every heartbeat recorded. Radiation, navigation, re-entry angles, all had to be perfect. The margin for error was smaller than a human breath. Armstrong took one last look at the moon before it disappeared entirely behind them. "Goodbye," he whispered. "We'll be back." The moon said nothing. It never does. For the next 2 days, they drifted toward Earth, sleeping in shifts, eating small freeze-dried meals, watching the stars. There was no sense of time, only the hum of machinery and the soft voices from Houston, reminding them that the world waited below. On the final day, the Earth filled their window, a massive glowing world of oceans and clouds. "Home," Collins said. "Almost home." Mission Control prepared for re-entry, tension building once more. Krantz gathered his team. "Gentlemen," he said, "this is it. Let's bring them back in one piece." The astronauts suited up, securing their harnesses. "It's strange," Aldrin said, "to have gone so far just to fall back where we started." Armstrong smiled faintly. "That's the beauty of it. The circle closes. The spacecraft tilted, aligning itself for re-entry. Outside the window, the Earth's atmosphere shimmered like blue fire. For a few minutes, there would be silence. No radio contact, just plasma and heat. Everyone knew it. Everyone feared it. Kranz checked his watch. "Entry interface in 30 seconds, he said. The voices from space crackled. "See you on the other side, Houston." Static. Then nothing. The silence fell like a weight. Every eye in mission control was fixed on the screen. The clock ticked. 1 minute, 2, 3. The capsule was now a streak of flame cutting through the upper atmosphere, moving faster than a bullet. Communication was gone. The only thing they could do was wait. 4 minutes, 5. Then, a voice. "Houston, Apollo 11. We're through the blackout. Everything's fine." Cheers erupted. The entire room stood shouting, clapping, crying. The 3 men inside the capsule smiled at one another, sweat glistening on their foreheads. "We made it," Aldrin said. Armstrong laughed softly. "Told you we would." Outside, through the small window, they could see streaks of orange flame fading to blue sky. Parachutes deployed above them. 3 great red and white canopies opening like flowers against the heavens. The descent slowed, gentle now, the roar replaced by the whisper of wind. Below them, the Pacific Ocean shimmered. The recovery ships waited. A voice crackled over the radio. "Apollo 11, this is Hornet. We have visual contact." Armstrong smiled. "Good to hear it, Hornet." They splashed down hard, water bursting high around the capsule. For a moment, all they could hear was the slap of waves and their own laughter. Then came the sound of helicopters overhead, the cheers of sailors, the world rushing back. Back in Houston, Kranz removed his headset. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to close his eyes. "They're home," he whispered. The Sleepless mission was over. The world that woke up, the Pacific Ocean, shimmered beneath a rising sun. Waves rolled gently as if the Earth itself breathed in relief. Floating among those endless blue waters was a small capsule, scorched, battered, and beautiful. Inside were 3 men who had gone farther than anyone before them. Helicopters hovered overhead. Divers leaped into the sea, their shouts echoing through the morning air. The astronauts inside waited silent, listening to the knock of hands on the hull. "Welcome home, boys," someone called. Armstrong grinned through his helmet. "Glad to be back." The hatch opened and sunlight poured inside, warm, golden, alive. After the endless gray of the moon and the darkness of space, that light felt like a miracle. One by one, they were lifted out, guided into the waiting raft and then to the recovery ship, the USS Hornet. As Armstrong's boots touched the deck, applause broke out from every corner of the carrier. Sailors cheered, reporters wept, and somewhere across the world, millions of television screens flickered with the same image. 3 men, soaked and smiling, home at last. But the journey wasn't over. NASA had one final precaution: quarantine. The moon was an unknown world, and though no one truly believed it carried disease, they couldn't take chances. The astronauts were ushered into a small silver trailer, a mobile quarantine facility, where they would spend the next 21 days. Inside the trailer, the 3 men sat at a small table, still wearing their flight suits. For the first time in days, there was stillness. No alarms, no engines, just silence. The same kind of silence they had left behind on the moon, but now it felt peaceful. Aldrin leaned back, closing his eyes. "I think I could sleep for a week," Collins smiled. "After what we just did, I think we earned it." Armstrong looked through the small round window, seeing the endless sea outside. "Funny," he said softly. "All that distance we traveled, and the most beautiful sight is still home." On the deck outside, President Richard Nixon arrived to greet them, not in person, but through a glass window, as protocol demanded. He smiled and waved, his voice crackling through the intercom. "Gentlemen, welcome back to Earth. You've made history." Armstrong nodded from inside the trailer. "Thank you, Mr. President. It's good to be back on this planet." The president laughed. "I think we all agree with that." That night, as the ship sailed toward Hawaii, the world below their orbit began to change. Children played outside pretending to be astronauts. Parents pointed at the sky and whispered to their sons and daughters. They did it. In New York, people danced in the streets. In London, church bells rang. In Tokyo, crowds gathered in front of shop windows showing black and white footage of the landing. Humanity, divided by borders, languages, beliefs, had for one sleepless night been united by wonder. And yet, inside the small quarantine trailer, the astronauts lived quietly. They ate simple meals, wrote letters, filled out reports. Armstrong spent hours jotting notes, reflecting on what it all meant. "We came in peace for all mankind," he wrote. "But maybe we also came to remind ourselves what mankind can be." Aldrin, ever the engineer, analyzed their equipment logs, making sure every valve and switch was accounted for. Collins, always observant, watched the stars through the tiny window at night, tracing constellations that now felt both familiar and eternal. One evening, Armstrong said softly, "You know, people will talk about the moon, but what I'll remember is the night before we landed. That quiet in the cabin. The waiting. The way everyone back on Earth couldn't sleep either." Aldrin nodded. "Yeah, the world was awake together." 3 weeks later, the quarantine was lifted. Cameras flashed as the astronauts stepped out, looking thinner, paler, but smiling. Reporters swarmed, asking endless questions. What did you feel? What did you see? What comes next? Armstrong's answer was simple. It was one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. What comes next is up to mankind. They traveled across America, riding in parades, waving to crowds that lined every street. Banners fluttered. "Welcome home, Apollo 11. In every city, people cheered until their voices broke. It wasn't just pride, it was gratitude. For the first time, humanity had touched the impossible. In Houston, the engineers who had stayed awake for days finally went home. Some slept for 20 hours straight. Others couldn't sleep at all, still replaying every second of that mission in their minds. Gene Kranz, the man who had kept them steady, walked out of mission control into the dawn light. For the first time in days, he smiled without tension. "We did it," he said softly. They all came home. Weeks turned into months. The Apollo 11 crew returned to their families, their homes, their quiet lives. Armstrong settled into teaching and reflection. Aldrin continued with science and faith. Collins wrote a book about solitude, about what it meant to orbit alone, to see both the Earth and Moon and belong to neither. But even as life returned to normal, something had shifted. The Earth no longer seemed infinite. From space, it had looked small, fragile, a blue marble in a vast black ocean. The mission that had begun with sleepless fear ended with awakened perspective. Humanity had looked outward and seen itself. Years later, Armstrong would rarely speak of that night before the landing. But those who knew him said that sometimes when he gazed at the moon, a faint smile crossed his face. Quiet, knowing, content. Because he remembered. He remembered the stillness in the lunar module as the world waited below. He remembered the voices from Houston, steady, human, hopeful. He remembered the sleepless mission, not as a night of exhaustion, but as a night of unity. And he knew that while the footprints on the moon would last millions of years, the real mark of Apollo 11 was on the hearts of those who never left Earth, the millions who watched, who believed, who stayed awake together. The moon became a mirror, reflecting the best of what humanity could be, even now, decades later. Every time we look up at that glowing white disk, a quiet echo lingers, the heartbeat of a sleepless night when mankind dared to dream beyond its limits. A whisper that says, "We were there, and maybe one day we'll go again." The world sleeps differently now, not because we found rest, but because we learned how to dream wider.